I've always had a hard time recording videos of myself, primarily because it's hard for me to just speak to no one in general. When I have somebody sitting in front of me, a living, breathing being, and they produce a question, the response, in whatever form it comes out, is naturally forthcoming. It's nothing that needs to be thought about or forced or contrived. It just emerges. But when I set the screen up, and often the camera reflects the image, especially on the phone, back to myself of sitting in this chair, the reason I have a hard time is because I don't know that person. I mean, the person is familiar to me. I see them in the mirror every single day. But I am fundamentally not that person. I know this. I've always known this. In a very bizarre kind of way. Even as a child, I knew this, which is why I'd spend hours in the bathroom staring into the mirror. And sometimes I would sit and stare at my hands and just keep staring at my hands for several minutes until, after a time, my own hand would begin looking alien to me. And I'd stare at this. And I'd just keep repeating the same question over and over, kind of like a mantra. How am I alive? How am I alive? How am I alive? And each time I'd say that sentence, I'd blink as if refreshing the browser. Go, how am I alive? How am I alive? And with each blink, every time reality rendered itself again, it seemed more unreal. And then when I'd look in the mirror, after doing that exercise, I'd be shocked to find that even that faint sense of familiarity I had once felt with that image in the mirror was gone. I'd be staring at a complete stranger. And I'd marvel at that sensation. Marvel at that feeling of being so completely other than the entire world thought I was. Then my own body was reflecting back to me. I continue to feel like that to this day. There are, of course, times when it's more intense, times when it's not quite as intense. But fundamentally, and this is something you can try yourself, is stand in front of the mirror, let about 30 seconds or so pass as you're gazing into your own reflection. And as you do that, be aware that there are two vantage points. When you're focused on the image, your attention is in the mirror. But for 1 second, pull your attention back to that part of you that's looking out, even to where you are in space with respect to the mirror. Pull your attention back to the place from which you're watching that image, and notice in that moment how different the two are. The image has this certain quality of materiality to it, and yet what's looking has a completely different quality, one of pure awareness. And the one thing that mirror cannot reflect back to you is awareness. It can reflect everything else back. It can reflect your body back to you, the form, the age. It can reflect your facial expressions. But what it cannot reflect back to you is what it is that's looking out, which is fundamentally, at least for me, It's my understanding and my experience, is fundamentally who I am. All of that keeps changing. It keeps transforming. I keep looking at my face in the mirror and I see every day more whites appearing in that beard. And down here, a few years ago, there were hardly any whites. 10 years ago, I remember identifying my very first white hair somewhere in my mustache and going, oh, look at that. And another 10 years from now, it'll all be white. And this face, the skin will become more and more sallow and wrinkled. The strength in these arms will start to fade. The sharpness of this mind will start to fade. All of that will happen. Some of that will be reflected in the mirror. Some may not be reflected in the mirror to that extent. But the one thing that I know will never change, because it hasn't. This is only empirical. It's from my own experience. It hasn't. In all this time, 42 now, turning 43, I'm talking about when I was 7 years old, 8 years old, sitting in the bathroom. What has not changed is what was looking out into the mirror. That has remained consistent. The image in the mirror has changed over the last 35, 40, 43 years. Every day it changes. Every time I look in the mirror, there's something else different. There's a little pimple there, or the hair's too long, or something or the other, a little blackhead that needs to be popped. It doesn't matter. It's all cosmetic. But somehow, what is looking out into the mirror is unconditionally the same. And here's another very, very, very curious thing I found. What is looking out into the mirror has no preference about how that image appears in the mirror. It doesn't care if what it sees is young or old, is happy or looks miserable and morose, is healthy or looks sick and unkempt. It doesn't really care. It just witnesses it. It allows it to be there. Because I would imagine that if it truly did have preferences, it would develop the ability to blot the image out. If it doesn't like what it sees, it wouldn't see it at all. And yet it sees it every single time. And then there is something within the mind that might respond in certain ways, favorably or unfavorably, but all of that is more just the conditioned patterns of the mind. But that happens after the fact. That happens after the perception. The act of perception's already happened. But when that act of perception happens, that first instant, all of that happens purely without any judgment at all. And that I have found to be profoundly liberating. Is I can literally take all of me, the story, the character, the ups and the downs, and the trials and the tribulations, and the triumphs and the losses, and journey of it, take it to the bathroom and look at it all in the mirror. And then I step outside of myself, in a sense. I say, but what is looking? And that which is looking doesn't care. And I don't mean doesn't care as in it's apathetic. But it doesn't care in the sense that it is unconditionally open to all these experiences. Because it sees value and significance in everything that happens. no matter how dull, no matter how mundane, no matter how dramatic, no matter how glorious, no matter how despicable. It sees it all. And the beautiful thing is, it's always been there. And it's the basis of me. It's the basis of my life. It is the basis of my perception. It's the basis of everything that comes out from me. Without awareness, none of me could happen. Without that awareness, none of even my thoughts or my worries about the future could happen. Without that awareness, even the suffering couldn't have happened. It would have no context. It would have no ability to occur. So that perception is the foundation. It's the root of myself. And at my root, I am always untouched, imperturbable, equanimous, as are you, as is everybody else. They just don't know it. But is it all that important to know it? I leave that question up to you.